Sorry?
She's saying
Yes, indeed. Welcome, Mr. Roux. I wonder if you have an opening statement, and if so, if I could stress for it to be rather brief, and perhaps you could table the rest of your statement.
It's brief, Chair, and hopefully we can distribute to the members.
That would be great if you could table that.
Hopefully. Yep. Thank you. So good evening, Senators. For those who haven't met me, I'm Stephen Roux, the Chief Executive Officer of NBN Co, a role I've had for 4 years. I'd also like to introduce you to Catherine Dyer, who's our Chief Operating Officer, Gavin Williams at the end, who's our Chief Development Officer for Regional Remote. He's also our Acting Chief Commercial Officer, and Will Irving, who's our Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer. So, as I said, I will be brief. I'd firstly like to just provide the committee a brief update on the flooding situation across Eastern Australia and NBN's response. As you'll be aware, in recent weeks, storms across Victoria, New South Wales, Tasmania and Queensland have led to widespread heavy rain, damaging winds and flash flooding. It's been devastating to see the impact on many of these communities, especially those that have only recently recovered from earlier flooding events. Over the duration of the flood events, more than 130 network sites have been impacted, affecting more than 51,000 customers. From an NBN perspective, though, the network has held up well. In Victoria, our emergency satellite services provided connectivity to 9 local evacuation and recovery centres across 7 communities, including Shepparton and Bendigo. We also deployed 2 mobile satellite muster trucks to provide connectivity to temporary evacuation and recovery centres in Rochester after the community hub where our emergency satellite service equipment was located was flooded. Further, we're also deploying a multi-tech trailer to Briar Hill to temporarily establish services to 259 customers until power was restored. Our emergency management team, I can assure the committee, is fully focused on these extreme weather events and ensuring that access to the network is maintained in affected areas and restored as quickly as possible. Now, tonight, Mr. Williams and Ms. Dyer can provide the committee further information on a flood recovery if the committee chooses. Last month, the government announced a $2.4 billion investment so an additional 1.5 million homes and businesses across Australia can upgrade to fibre to the premise on demand. That means by the end of 2025, 3.5 million premises in the FTTN footprint will be able to make this upgrade by ordering a higher speed tier. There are now more than 1 million FTTC and FTTN premises that can order an on-demand upgrade to an FTTP service, and we're seeing a steady flow of orders for these fibre upgrades. And thanks to this progress, we remain on track to make NBN's highest wholesale speed tiers available to 75% of the fixed line network by the end of 2023 and to 90% by the end of 25. I'm pleased to tell the committee we're also making good progress on a $750 million investment with the government into the fixed wireless network, which will deliver significantly faster speeds for regional Australia. We're adding 5G and other cutting-edge technology to our existing 4G network to enhance both speed and coverage areas, and up to 120,000 premises in the satellite footprint will be able to move to fixed wireless, while those who remain on our satellite network will benefit from an uplift in data allowances and improved off-peak times. And as I've said many times before, NBN is Australia's digital backbone and a key plank in our nation's global competitiveness and economic future. Growing the capacity and capability of the NBN is vital to staying ahead of the nation's digital demands. And again, Mr. Williams and Ms. Dyer can provide the committee further information. 2 more things, Chair. On the finance front, the company has been heavily engaged with the debt markets, enabling repayment of $14 billion of the Commonwealth loan, leaving an outstanding balance of $5.5 billion as at September 2022. The remaining $5.5 billion of the Commonwealth loan needs to be refinanced by 30 June 24, and I'll keep the committee updated on this. And finally, I want to update the committee on our ongoing work with the ACCC and industry on the Special Access Undertaking, or SAU. NBN is developing a revised SAU variation that seeks to address the feedback we've heard from industry, the ACCC and other interested parties. We understand the importance of getting this right for all stakeholders involved, including customers. We believe, for example, that our SAU variation will address a long-standing concern of retailers around pricing certainty. We've also been mindful to ensure NBN Co retains the opportunity, subject to market conditions, to meet our financial commitments, sustain our business, and ensure we can continue to invest in the network to uplift the digital capability of Australia. As for next steps, we anticipate lodging a revised SAU proposal as soon as possible, and we're committed to working with the ACCC and industry to achieve an acceptable SAU variation in the first half of 2023, with an implementation date of 1 July 23. And tomorrow we'll be also releasing our latest wholesale broadband agreement consultation paper. This is an important step to ensure a contractual offer can be presented to RSPs for negotiation and agreement in time for the implementation of a new SAU by July 23. And Will Irving here tonight can address any questions the committee may have on our SAU variation. So, Chair, thank you for allowing me the time to make my opening remarks. My team and I are now very happy to take your questions, or those of your colleagues on the committee.
Thank you very much. We will start with Senator Duniam.
Thank you very much, Chair. Hello.
Evening, Senator.
Good to see you. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions around end users and contractors who install and deal with NBN equipment, and a couple of changes I understand around what they're authorised to do without coming and needing to seek permission. And I was provided an article which I'll provide to you and the committee if you would like. And I will seek your guidance on this because some of it might be very technical, but it is really aimed at seeking a solution for the end users. The article states here, the NBN allows registered cabling technicians to make a range of changes to NBN equipment within a user's premises without seeking prior permission from NBN. Such changes may include rewiring a home in order to move a network termination device from one room to another, more suited to the end user's needs. The original authority to alter only allowed registered cablers to modify internal cabling after the network boundary on the NBN FTTP network. That's now been expanded, etc., etc. It then goes on to say, note, all licensed cablers must use approved equipment and methods to make any modifications under the authority to alter, and all work still requires provision of a TCA1 form, etc. So it says you can go and do it without having to come and seek permission if you've got some sort of registration, but you need to use the right equipment. And it's been put to me that those items are only available through a particular retailer, AWM, or wholesaler, I guess, but AWM won't sell to these end users for installation. Are you aware of that?
No, Senator. Neither Catherine nor I are aware of that.
Okay, so
Where's the article, Senator? Can you help me?
I beg your pardon?
Can you help me with the source of the article? Does it say?
The article, yes, which I will provide to you. The article came from a magazine called Circuit, Electrical Contracting Engineering. It's the March 2020 edition in association with the Master Electricians Australia, and it's the technical story from that article. I'll provide that to the committee.
Senator, we're going to have to take that on notice because I'm not familiar.
Well then, a few things you might take on notice. One, whether you can inquire as to whether AWM, who I understand are the sole suppliers of the material needed to do things in line with the standards required by NBN, do sell directly to contractors, the end users, and if they don't, why they don't.
When you say end users, you mean the people,
contractors,
the
sorry,
contractors, not the person using the service. Sorry.
Correct. Right. So whether they can procure this from the sole provider within Australia, AWM, I'm told, and if they can't, why they can't.
Yep.
On a slightly separate matter, it's also been put to me the pit covers, those often concrete, sometimes composite. I understand Telstra's gone down the path of rolling out only composite pit covers, which are lighter, more durable, more expensive. What is NBN's position with regard to that? Are we looking at rolling out the composite or? the mix?
I'll have to take that on notice. So we follow engineering standards for everything that we do install. The majority of the pits that are already pre-existing, and we only replace pit lids if they're damaged or they need replacing. So when we install new pits, we upgrade them to the most current standard. But in relation to the composite material, I would need to take that away.
If you could, yes. So this was put to me with regard to new developments, industrial or residential, and when someone goes to tender for the job, the person seeking the tenders will often go for the cheapest job, and because the concrete pit covers are cheaper than the composite ones, those bidding with composite built into their bid, their tender, often miss out, even though the material's better, more durable, better for the OH&S, for the workers. So if you could take that on notice, particularly whether NBN is looking at moving down the same path as Telstra in rolling out composite and not concrete. In terms of access to information around multi-storey buildings, be they residential or commercial, who retains all of the information around the NBN infrastructure for a multi-storey, multi-tenancy unit?
Yes. So in multi-dwelling unit spaces, so once we deploy and build the network, we update our spatial systems, and that records all of our network that's as built. So we nominate the equipment that's been installed as well as where that equipment's been terminated. So depending on what has been deployed in that particular building, we'll also note that in our spatial systems of what technology is in the building. So we maintain a record of that.
And is that information available to contractors easily?
Not contractors specifically. So once the backbone of the network is installed and the building is made ready for orders, if you like, the contractor that would receive that request to complete an activation exercise would get information relating to where the nearest access point is and where they need to connect into. But in terms of the whole cabling in the building, we wouldn't give that level of information.
Sure. And so in the event that a contractor is asked to come in and do some work on a particular tenancy and move a piece of equipment from point A to point B, they would have access to that information easily or not?
Depending on the technology, they would have information. So if I can just take that one step further. So if, for example, that was a large multi-dwelling unit and it was fibre to the basement, the location of or the termination of NBN's asset would be potentially in the basement of the building. So what if you're a technician, your termination point would be back in the basement of the building, utilising the copper cable throughout the building. So that's one example. The other example is fibre to the premises, where the termination boundary point is in the actual unit itself. So the contractor would definitely see that boundary point.
Okay, I might have some further questions on notice around difficulties that contractors have had with regard to that issue. Finally, 2 points I want to go to. Standards required by NBN in the installation and further servicing or dealing with their equipment. Are those standards readily available? And how do contractors?
Yes, they are. We have a certification program for contractors working on the NBN network. We have a quality framework, and we also have an audit framework of those works that are completed, and they are readily available to those contractors. In fact, it's a requirement for them to be able to work with NBN.
Okay, so do you think on notice then perhaps you might be able to provide me information around the program or the process a contractor would go through in order to gain accreditation, the audit process you mentioned, and if you could also on notice outline for me the ways in which the standards required of anyone dealing with the equipment, how they access that and what sheds on. That would be great.
Yep.
All right, that's all from me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Pocock.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your time this evening. I'm keen to learn a bit more about the recently announced upgrades to 1.5 million premises across Australia. How did NBN Co decide which premises would be upgraded as part of this?
Well, we haven't actually, sorry, Sandra, we haven't actually completely completed, but what we look at is things like where there are contiguous areas. We look at where there are, if you like, the cheaper parts to build that gives us a better return on investment. So they've been selected really on the basis of a commercial return to the company, because we are tasked with investments we make need to have a commercial return as part of the business part of a GBE, but obviously we need to comply with government policy as well.
Is there transparency around that decision making, or do you sort of just announce this is where we're going to do upgrades?
I mean, we've talked before, and I think we've put out, I think in corporate plans before, I think, Sandra, I'd have to check that, but we certainly have said on public and new record that we look at, firstly, where we can make a commercial return. We look at where we think there may be a large take-up as well, and that's part of a commercial return. We look, as I said, around contiguous areas where it's best to build. We also made commitments in the first 2 million premises that we would build across all states, and we'd also build a significant amount in regional Australia. I think we've laid all that out, Senator Pocock.
Earlier in your opening statement, you mentioned the NBN being the digital backbone, being crucial for global competitiveness.
Yep.
How do you weigh that with simply upgrading whatever's going to be cheapest?
Well, when I say cheapest, what I mean is to get a commercial return. So what I'm tasked to do, Senator, is to deliver upon government policy first and foremost, but secondly to also ensure that the company makes a commercial return on investment unless it has received, in the case of fixed wireless, for example, part of that investment as a grant from the federal government, recognising that there isn't a commercial return. So what we therefore have to weigh up is the best way to deliver government policy within the parameters of having a relatively small return on investments, to be fair. In terms of other things that we put in place is, for example, a $300 million investment fund which we put in place with states and territories to enable co-funding arrangements to exist between state governments and NBN, or between the or territory and NBN. But it's not, for us, our task is not to model the broad best GDP return per se, because that then becomes a policy decision of government. Our job is to, as I said, to balance the business side of NBN with the policy side of NBN.
Thank you. And you mentioned states and territories. Do you have a breakdown of the fibre to the premises upgrades by state and territory so far?
We have announced. Sorry, can you ask that question again? Sorry, the breakdown.
Yes, the proportion between the states and territories of your upgrades of fibre to the premises. What does that look like?
Yeah, we have announced the first 2 million premises that we were upgrading. We've announced all those areas, and therefore states and territory breakdown. The first 1.1 million we've announced, but I should stress that actually does not necessarily cover every suburb. So, for example, if we only announce suburbs until we've actually built in an area that are that are greater than 1,000 premises, and the reason for that is that you end up with. We don't always do a whole suburb, for example, so we may leave a particular part of a suburb out because it might have a lot of rock. It might be or expensive, or other reasons that it's not appropriate for us to select those particular premises. So we have announced, as I said, the suburbs over 1,000 for the first 3.1 million homes, and that gives a pretty good indication of the breakdown by state and territory. The remaining suburbs that we will select will depend upon desktop reviews of actual how areas will be designed, and based upon that we will over time announce the rest of the premises.
Do you have those figures on you for the proportion? Do you know what
I don't have them on me, Sandra. I'd have to take it away. But again, not everywhere has been actually announced to date,
But
so
the ones you've done to date,
it won't give you a full picture. Plus, it's got to be added into what technologies was already in those particular states.
My question was, of the upgrades you've already done, the proportion split between states and territories. I'm interested in that.
Of the ones we've already done or already
Yes,
announced?
already done.
Already done. We'd have to take that away and we can give you that analysis.
Okay, that'd be great. And then of the ones that you've sort of announced and have planned, do you know how many will be in the ACT?
Do we have that figure with us? If we don't, I'll get it to you by the end of the hearing. But of what's been announced, the number of premises,
Yeah.
I can give you an estimate by the end of the hearing, I think,
Okay,
Senator.
thank you.
Pocock, one of my team can give it to us.
And in terms of allocating those upgrades, what I'm hearing is it's sort of based on what's going to get you the return. There's no consideration for how they're spread amongst different jurisdictions, different states and territories.
Look, I think the vast majority of states and territories will end up with around about 90%.
I get, but in terms of the process, that's not a consideration.
That's not a consideration, no, Senator. But as it turns out, the vast majority of states will end up around about 90%.
Okay. 90%.
Yep.
Do you know what the ACTs will end up at?
I believe it will be short of that, Senator, and that's because of the cost of build in the ACT from both the way that councils have talked about it. I presume you understand this, but the way the poles have been located and the amount of rock that there is in the ACT means it's more expensive. Catherine can expand upon that.
Yes, so a large number of premises in the ACT have lead-ins that essentially are at the rear of the property. They're aerial, and they're a lot more expensive to do. So I think what Mr. Rue is saying is when we do get you that percentage split, certainly for the first 2 million premises, which we can confirm with you, you will absolutely see that ACT has, in terms of a percentage term, has the lowest proportion. We did announce as part of the 1.5 million that there are more ACT areas, and we haven't fully worked through the full 1.5 million. However, it is my expectation that when we do, when the 3.5 million is fully accounted for from a construction point of view, there will still be an imbalance with the ACT percentage. So
Senator, to put that a different way, if for us to build more in the ACT, they are not commercially viable for us as a standalone. So we would need funding from somewhere to be able to do more in the ACT, which is the very reason actually why I put in place a co-investment with states and territories to be able to deal with situations such as this. Are
you in discussions with the ACT government?
I met the ACT Chief Minister about a year ago, Senator, and I talked generally about his desire for what he wanted to do in the ACT from a policy point of view. I haven't spoken with him since then, though.
Okay, so since this latest announcement, there's been no announcement, no. And there's been no sort of representation from the ACT government saying, how can we make
no,
this?
Senator, not that has hit my desk, no,
okay.
And I think it would have.
Thank you. Just finally, to stick with the ACT, do you know how many premises in the ACT don't meet the legal requirement for a minimum download speed of 25 megabits per second?
I'd have to take that on notice, Senator. Sorry, okay. But I'll have to. We can come back to you on that.
Okay, thank you. Is that how long will that take?
That won't be tonight. That's a different exercise.
It's not in a spreadsheet somewhere.
Well, it's variable because it depends on a point in time often. Without getting into technicalities,
yeah, no, that's fine.
We can give you an estimate, Senator. Okay. I'm not sure I can give you the precise number, but I can give you an estimate.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Senator Payman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your time tonight.
Not at all.
Hello. You briefly mentioned in your opening statement, Mr. Rue, about just some of the mitigation strategies, but I was wondering if you could delve into what you think has been the primary cause of the service downtime, I guess aside from what you've mentioned in your opening statement about the 2 mobile satellite muster trucks that provided that temporary evacuation and assisted that.
I think you're, sorry to interrupt, Sandra, I think you're talking about the floods, the downtime during floods.
Yes. So that's what I mean during that.
Yeah, sure. Maybe, Gavin, do you want to talk to that and so on?
Yeah, maybe.
Let's dive
in. So, thank you, Senator. So the key thing that impacts network during pretty much any natural disaster is loss of mains power. Now, of course, in the case of the recent flooding, we also can suffer from the combination of mains power loss with assets being submerged. So that's what we've seen in central Victoria and up in Goolongong Way currently. So there's a range of mitigations that we put in place. So, but bearing in mind, we're going through floods now, but of course, at other times, fire and cyclonic conditions impact our networks too. So our teams are constantly engaged with the Bureau of Meteorology, always seeking to be match fit on where the threat levels are in particular places. And at this time of year, as we approach, in other words, we call it the disaster season, literally vegetation cropping around fixed wireless assets, for example, to minimise fire threat. The sorts of, bluntly, the sorts of learnings we have with these floods is construction includes build on 50-year, north of 50-year flood events. So here we're seeing an extraordinary level of floods. It's making us sort of rethink some of our designs. So, for example, do we need to lift the cabinet in Goolongong when we can get access to it? They're the sorts of things we look at. But then during the recovery phase, there's a range of mobile assets that we bring to bear. So Mr. Roo spoke to the muster vehicles, which are off-grid satellite trucks. But we also have different guises of what we call network on wheels that enable us to go and inject a piece of kit on the back of a trailer, and that can immediately replace a range of technologies, whether it's fibre to the node or fibre to the premises or fixed wireless. And we have other assets, in fact, like a fixed wireless mast that can, a hydraulic mast that can take the place of certain towers. And Senator, one final point is the work we're doing on power resilience. We have a range, for example, of key fixed wireless sites that have hybrid generators that include solar power, diesel generators and battery packs that are able to maintain powering for a protracted period off-grid, and that of course adds to temporary power through diesel generators at a time when mains is out. Ms. Dyer, have you got anything to...
Just in the recent floods, which have been very devastating, about 135,000 premises or customers were impacted. There's a few hundred now that are currently offline. So what we're able to do with what Mr. Williams was saying, we're able to bring services back online quite rapidly. We are now working in advance of some of the network efforts that are expected. So, for example, in Rochester in Victoria, which was very badly impacted by the floods, we're actually proactively, as that area comes out of being a red zone, which means you can't work in the area, we're deploying our own internal workforce and doing proactive work like remaking joints in anticipation of those customers coming back online. So we're sort of trying to stay a few steps ahead of the customers. But again, with broadly that 135,000 customers or homes that were impacted, we've managed to bring them online quite quickly.
How long can the temporary services last for? Just out of curiosity. I mean, you mentioned that there are personnel or you've got technologies that will assist in the interim sort of recovery phase. How long would it last? And
well, batteries typically, where we have battery backup, depending on the infrastructure, would be typically 4 to 8 hours. But the key outside of mains power, diesel generators is really the most, next most reliable alternative. Now they can run as long as we can get fuel runs. Now often we find that, for example, during fires, we may not be able to run to accomplish fuel runs. So, that's a consideration, but where it's safe to do so, we'll refuel them, and it's, it can be really indefinite. And these hybrid power cubes that I mentioned, we've had examples where they've been pretty much off-grid, not needing a fuel run for 6 months.
Yeah, thank you for that. And are there any particular technologies more prone to losing power because of where the active electronics in the network are located?
Yeah. Yes, there is, Sandra. Catherine, do you want to?
Yes, so with the HFC network, so that's absolutely the technology that is impacted more by power outages because the generation of the power lies within the network. That is predominantly the main one. With other networks such as FTTP, obviously if you have homes in an area that lose power, also their NTD, their termination device in their home loses power. But in terms of the technology impacted the most, it is HFC.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. That's all from me,
Thank
Chair.
you. Senator Henderson.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Good evening.
Mr. Wu and others. Good evening.
Good evening.
Look, I just wanted to start by asking about the 1.5 million premises expansion. Was that part of NBN's plan?
Sandra, we since I think 2000, the reason I'm thinking is 2014, 2015, but around that time have been tasked with building a network, but then also considering potential upgrade paths. So, for example, what will be an upgrade path for fibre to the node? What will be an upgrade path for fibre to the curb? Or the plan that Mr. Williams has for fixed wireless, for example. So we have looked at, therefore, the possibility of rolling fibre deeper into communities outside people's homes and then building a fibre lead in. In terms of the so has there been a plan in the company to upgrade more premises? Prior to last election, there was a plan to upgrade 2 million. We knew that the upgrade path for from copper was a fibre upgrade, and therefore we knew that was a potential pathway that would need to be taken, but it needed funding, Senator, so it was not in our corporate plan per se.
Mr. Roux, can you just explain, have you determined which areas or which suburbs will receive that additional connectivity or the ready-to-connect potential?
As I explained to Senator Pocock earlier, the task for us really is to do detailed designs over the next while to determine exactly what areas we will go to. There are some suburbs that we knew we would go to simply because they were, when we looked at the first 2 million, they were close to being included in the first 2 million, or they may have been, when I say contiguous suburbs, what I meant by that, sorry, Senator Pocock didn't explain, was that if we're already building in an area, it is sensible to expand that workforce into areas close by, because then it's a continuation of work, for example.
And did you release those potential rollout suburbs publicly or provide any information to the Labor Party when they were in opposition?
Oh no, not at all. No, the suburbs were, I mean, it's only just recently after the post May that we've actually looked at what in detail about what areas would we go to and why, and it's only now that we're still in the process of considering what would be exactly the 1.5 million premises. So to
made that decision. No locations have been confirmed.
Oh, there has been confirmed suburbs where we would go to, but we haven't completed the full build out of exactly where that would be. And to give you
sorry, just to understand, I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's all right.
You said that you were still assessing where that expansion would
occur. The whole
occur.
1.5 million, yes.
But you've made some location determinations, is
There's
that right?
About 1.1 million of those have been outlined, Sandra, but the rest...
And when
will
were they
take us-
outlined, and where is that information published?
welcome to talk to.
We've only published a handful of suburbs
yeah.
in the recent 1.5
That's right.
announcement. So the rest, as Mr. Rue's saying, is we're working through now. So we haven't made that information available because we are still working through those details. And I think
So you published a handful of suburbs,
in
recently?
each state. Yeah, I think that was like 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So look, I just want to ask you about a media release issued by the Honourable Kirsty McBain, the member for Eden Monaro, in a media release entitled "Labor to Fix Black Spots, Boost Full Fibre NBN Access in Eden Monaro" on the 6th of April 2022. She says our plan will see over 18,000 homes and businesses in Eden Monaro gain access to world-class fibre connectivity. This will be rolled out across the region, including but not limited to Jerrabomberra, Eden, Merimbula, Bungendore, Bega, Pambula and Dalmini. Now, I've looked up all of those suburbs. Dalmini, if that's the correct pronunciation, Dalmini is included in the $2 million, the Coalition's $2 million fibre FTTN upgrade. But on what basis could any Member of Parliament make commitments in relation to that expansion if those locations were not known?
You'd have to ask the member, Senator.
So is there any information that was released that would
No,
have
Senator.
justified making this claim?
No, Senator, you'd have to ask the member.
Minister, can I ask you about this? This appears to be a false claim made by the member for Eden Monaro.
Well, first of all, I really think that you should refrain from using that sort of language because it won't be a false claim at all. But I'll take your question on notice and get back to you as soon as I can.
Well, we've just heard that there is no information publicly released which would have enabled anyone to make commitments about where this expansion would be delivered to. And so, prima facie, Minister, the claim by the member for Eden Monaro does appear to be false.
Senator,
Again-
I will ask you to not reflect negatively in that manner. I think if there is a question here about the data, we should ask the question. We should obtain the information before you make any accusations.
I'm sorry, Chair, I have the call. I am entitled to question the claims by the member for Eden Monaro.
You are not, however, enabled to reflect adversely on the member for Eden Monaro without having some evidence.
Well, I'm sorry.
She's reflected on the member for
I'm not
Eden Monaro.
imputing.
She has said
This is not a breach of the standing orders.
You've.
Sorry, this
I
is
would
not a
ask you
breach
to
of the standing orders,
Yes.
Chair. So I am going to ask this question of the Minister.
You've asked me the question, I've answered the question.
I would appreciate, Chair, if you didn't run interference when I'm trying to ask what are reasonable questions within order. So I appreciate that, Minister. Could you please take that on notice, because this is deeply concerning. Mr Rue, you said in your evidence earlier that your job is to deliver government policy. Now,
Absolutely, yes.
can I assume, given that the now government is adopting the Coalition's rollout, which is the multi-technology approach, fibre to the premises on demand, insofar as it accords with the rollout model, can I assume then that the government has abandoned its policy of delivering fibre to the premise to every premise in the country, with the exception of low population towns and regions?
Well, Senator, what I'm tasked to do at the moment, and again, that's a question of policy you'd need to ask the government, but what I'm tasked to do is to deliver upon existing policies, which in this case is to build out what summates to 3.5 million fibre in the street. But it's more than that. It's about our fixed wireless plan. It's about delivering customer experience. It's about running a commercial business. So my job is not to comment upon policy per se, but just to simply tell you what work we're doing at the moment.
No, but your job as the CEO of the NBN Co is to deliver a network based on government policy. So it's a reasonable question for me to ask you whether the rollout accords now with the government policy. Can we now say definitively that we have seen a formal switch in policy from the now Labor government, which of course previously condemned the coalition's rollout model?
Again, Senator, you're asking me a question on policy, which is not for me to comment on. I can simply tell you that what we are doing is apart from running a day-to-day business, of course, but is to continue to upgrade our network, our fixed wireless network, give people in the fibre to node areas the opportunity to buy fibre to the premise. And over time, our copper network will be replaced by fibre, I'm sure about that. But Senator, I can only tell you what our current work we're doing. I cannot comment upon government policy. It's not, or opposition policy. That is not for me. That is for the policy to do.
No, I appreciate that. But you've just given evidence that your job is to deliver a network based on government policy. So it's a reasonable question for me to ask you that this rollout now reflects this government's policy, which is the coalition's model.
Well, again, you're placing a political lens to that. I can only tell you that what we are doing is investing further in the upgrade of our network in both fibre to the node, in fibre to the curb, and in fixed wireless, and indeed the benefits that will flow through the satellite. But it's more but that's just talking about building out a network. We're also here, as I said, for to provide great service to customers for what they need for their lives, basically.
The last question in this block, and then we'll come back to you.
Reasonably short. I wouldn't mind a couple
11
more
minutes so
Chair.
far, just to be clear.
Thank you, Chair.
My pleasure.
Mr Rue, can you tell me about the NBN's delivery of projects under STAND, which is the Strengthening Telecommunications in Disasters program, a really very significant program for the former coalition government?
Yes, Gavin, do you want to talk to the stand?
So, Senator, the STAND program had a range of deliverables, including mobility solutions. So the program funded 5 muster vehicles. The sort that Mr Rue mentioned being deployed in Rochester and now in Goolongong.
And I was in Rochester, by the way, and I do want to thank the NBN for acting so promptly. We had some great on-the-ground communications in relation to getting more connectivity into Rochester. It was a very grim time, and I think everyone in the community did really welcome the way NBN Co moved so quickly.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. We'll pass that on to the team. Another key deliverable, I'll come to the disaster satellite services last, but the hybrid power cubes I spoke about earlier that power typically hub sites on our fixed wireless network. So these are the sites, a bit like Goolongong, that support further downstream sites. So they're first among equals really in respect of our fixed wireless network. So there's an imperative to provide an additional level of resilience. 40 hybrid power cubes. The program funded some multi-technology trailers. And then the final element was pre-installing satellite services to designated relief centres. So that would be in 2 categories. One is a community relief centre, evacuation centre, so pre-designated, defined by particular state or territory jurisdictions. And the second category is to services to emergency responders. So these might be RFS depots and the like. So, yeah, the consequence of each of those were delivered under the STAND program.
So in the Ford program, for instance, I think there's 700...
So, Senator Henderson, we are going to move on and come back to you.
Okay, thanks,
Over to
Chair.
Senator Pocock.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Ruth, thank you earlier for explaining how you select where to do upgrades. I'm interested if you've ever been directed by a minister to include areas that don't necessarily fit into that framework.
No, I haven't, Senator.
You haven't?
No, at all times we've been left with the task to determine where's the best place to go because of our requirement to run a commercial business.
But the 1.5 million upgrades, was that your decision, or was that
The quantum of 1.5 was a policy of the then opposition and now government. Where we will build out those 1.5 million is a matter for the company.
But your sort of mandate is to return value and I guess pay down this $5.5 billion of debt. The government can't tell you where to do that, but they can tell you how many to do.
Yeah, I think Senator,
So if they had have said 2.5 million,
well, I actually
then what
don't,
happens?
I don't know where the 1.5 came from. Actually, again, that's a matter you need to ask the government. But
can I ask the?
Sure.
You finish up, and then I'll ask the minister.
But as it turns out, there is around about 3.5 million commercial premises that make sense for me to build out to, which is and as it turns out, that's the 2 plus the 1.5. So we will work through from both a desktop point of view and then actually go into the field and determine through that work which premises we should actually build out to.
Okay. But the then opposition didn't contact you and say, how's 1.5 million?
No.
Okay. Minister, are you able to elaborate how the government landed on 1.5 million?
The investment that of 2.4 billion over 4 years, and the 1.5 million premises that will get full fibre access, I understand, was a conservative estimate, and I can any part of your question I'll hand to the Minister's office, but that means that 90% of homes and businesses in the NBN fixed line footprint will have access now to gigabyte speeds by late 2025, which is obviously very good news. As I understand, it was a very conservative estimate, and of that, of the $2.4 billion investment, 1.1 billion will be invested in rural and regional areas.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks,
which is a huge, massive investment.
No, it's very welcome. I guess I'm interested in how parties come up with 1.5 million and sort of without consulting the people who are doing it, because it could be a really big problem if you came out with a number and then they say, well, actually,
we did. My understanding, and I think this would be borne out, that Labor did undertake modelling in opposition using a number of data points to develop its NBN policy and associated cost estimates. The 1.5 million premises was based on this analysis and was close to commercial contours. So, I mean, it's a great announcement by any stretch of the imagination, and the fibre repair job is being delivered by the Labor government after nearly a decade, whereas the previous government's oversight of the NBN was a masterclass in economic and technological incompetence. They promised to deliver an inferior copper NBN for $29.5 billion, and these costs blew out to $58 billion. Australians deserve better, and Labor will deliver a better NBN.
Minister, you're adopting the coalition's model.
Mr. Roos,
I mean, seriously.
Senator Henderson, it is Senator Pocock's call.
last one. Just getting. No,
This investment is about expanding access to the optic fibre.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Mr. Roos, just to finish, the one last sort of question I had was with the added expense in the ACT, is it different in Queanbeyan? Like, is it cheaper, say, in Jerrabomberra?
Do you know the answer?
Is it like is it very much an ACT specific thing, or is it just being a regional?
Certainly the council regulations about where the poles are, etc., is certainly an ACT thing. Whether there is specifically rock issues in Queanbeyan, we'd have to come back to you. So we can also answer that. Now, my team, I promise you the answer to your question tonight. My team is struggling to answer it, so I may have to come back to you on that. So apologies.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. So I will just alert senators to the fact that we are coming up on 7 minutes to 9. Senator Henson, I believe you asked for 20 minutes. You've had 13. Do you think 7 is going to cut it for the rest of your session, as you had previously anticipated?
I am hoping so, Chair. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Please go ahead.
Don't hold me to that 20 minutes, but I will.
Oh, I'm going to try, given
I know you will
a
try.
lot of agencies waiting.
Yes, I know, but please
And
don't.
a hard finish at 11.
Yeah, I know, but please don't reflect on senators. We obviously have the ability to ask questions.
Absolutely, and I have never stopped you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mr. Roux, can I ask you about the bonuses paid to certain employees at the NBN? You're aware of the guidance issued by the former coalition government in relation to dramatically curtailing those bonuses. Could you explain the basis for the bonuses that have been paid to some of your employees, including yourself, Mr. Roux?
Is that this year, Senator?
Yes, that's right.
So, Senator, if I could refer you to the annual report, which actually lays this out very clearly. If you look at the annual report I don't know if you have the annual report in front of you, Senator, but the remuneration report starts at page 83. But what effectively it does is it looks at, for those employees who are eligible for the short-term incentive scheme, on page 91 of the annual report, you can see the specific areas that are reflected in what's called the short-term incentive corporate measures. So connected premises were 10% of the award, the customer service delivery 20%, trust and reputation 20%, transformation 25%, and financial sustainability 25%. So against each of those, there were specific targets set by the board, which are stretch targets for management to achieve. The board looked at the end of the year at the performance of the company against those awards, and again you can see there's commentary on that actually in this report, and as a result of that, the committee determined what percentage of the available, if you like, available scheme will be available to those members of the scheme. So the board determined that 66% of maximum would be awarded as a result of performance against those measures as a pool. Then what happens is that individuals within that pool, their individual performance is looked at, and the pool is then allocated to individuals depending upon their performance. So not everybody would have received 66%. Some may get slightly more, some may get slightly less, but the pool itself was a cap, if you like, of the total amount of short-term incentive that will be paid. So it's a very thorough process that the board does, including having the internal audit team audit the actual results of the year against those measures.
So if you were being so careful, on what basis did Ministers Rowland and Gallagher write to you expressing concern about the payment of bonuses? Obviously that letter was way too late because your results were already out and the decisions were already made.
Well, again, I'm sorry, I can't comment upon what was in the mind of the authors of the letter to us, but...
But you received the letter,
We have received the letter, and we have a period of time to respond to, and we will respond to that letter well in advance of the timeline. And we will outline in that letter the processes that we go through, the governance that we have, how we actually determine those awards, the external advice we receive, and so on. I mean, that will all be outlined.
I mean, I must say your bonuses were far more moderate than Australia Post's. Australia Post's bonuses were some $28 million. But even still, that guidance is an important guide to the NBN. Do you believe that you are in accordance with the principles of that guidance?
Well, Sandra, we received the guidance around remuneration last year, and the board, the Remuneration Committee, but the board itself looked at where we were as an organisation. We had completed the build of the network, or the initial build of the network, I should say. We were operating in a different environment than when the original short-term incentive scheme was being put in place, and the board was looking at the best way for remuneration structure to fairly reward employees, to be able to attract and retain employees, and in other words, to compete in the market we have. And on top of that, but very strongly, the board took into account the guidance from the government, and as a result of that, determined to reduce the pool of employees from, I think, was around 3,500 to around 50 employees, and looked at the best way to structure that adjustment from the old scheme to the new scheme. And all that is
so you went from 3,500 employees
to around about 50.
Receiving some form of bonus?
Some form, the way I like to put it is that some of their salary was the short-term incentive plan is putting some of their remuneration at risk.
So 3,500, which is an extraordinary number of employees, to some 50 now employees.
Well, at the time, the 3,500 employees was in our opinion, was the right thing to do as we were building out a network, and to incentivise employees around the build of that network. As we've moved into an operating phase, but particularly having taken into account government guidance, we have adjusted the remuneration structures for the vast majority of our workforce.
Mr Roux, I'm not going to ask you to comment on this, but you did hear the Minister denigrate to the Coalition's NBN rollout plan. Could you update the committee on where the rollout is at now, including how the $4.5 billion investment is delivering better connectivity for many, many Australians?
So is this the $4.5 billion investment? Is that what you're referring to?
That's right.
In the 2020 corporate plan?
That's right, and the build as it stands now, and what will be delivered by 2023 under the Coalition's NBN partnership.
Well, we have built out a NBN network to almost every single premise in Australia. There are some premises that are were treated as adequately served, and there are some very small number of premises that primarily for Indigenous heritage reasons actually have had an elongated period of build, which we will complete as soon as we can. But that's a very, very, very small number of premises. And they've been built under multiple ways, multiple services. Over time then, those services are being upgraded. So the $4.5 billion investment was, I think $2.9 billion of that was towards upgrading and putting lead-ins for 2 million premises in the fibre to node area. We also invested money to upgrade our HFC network to deliver somewhere between 500 and a gig speeds for a capability for that. We also have commenced upgrading our fibre to the curb to fibre to the premise as well. On top of that $4.5 billion though also included the co-investment fund that I was referring to Senator Pocock about. It also involves business upgrades where we're rolling out enterprise Ethernet across small and medium businesses. So those investments together formulated the $4.5 billion premises. So as of today, we have around about half of the premises in the fixed line footprint can deliver up to gig speeds. By 2025, though, that will be 90%. And on top of that, Senator, we have received a grant of $480 million, which goes towards a $750 million investment for Mr Williams here to upgrade over 600,000 fixed wireless homes and move 120,000 satellite customers to fixed wireless.
That was a grant, the $480 million grant from the former coalition government.
That was a grant we received at the end of June.
I think, Chair, sorry, Senator Hinton.
Sorry, Minister, did you want to add anything?
I was going to go back to a different topic, but...
just wanted to just check, in terms of the rollout by the end of 2023, so can you just confirm that you are on track to deliver those ultra-fast speeds to up to 75% of households and premises in the fixed line network by 2023?
Yes, we're on track to do that, Senator.
And that $4.5 billion investment was a big part of that expansion?
I think from memory, 2.5 billion of the 4.5 billion was towards building fibre from the actual cabinet all the way to outside people's homes. I think we allocated 400 million, I'm sorry, wish it was 1,000, 400 million for building fibre lead-ins then for what we thought was going to be a take-up rate between up to a particular date. So that was part of the upgrade, and as I said earlier, Senator, some of it as well was providing the capability for fibre to the curb and for HFC as well.
And you are delivering fibre to the premises on demand. So you're not delivering fibre cable into every household, only those who want to purchase it, which of course is a much more efficient way to deliver those ultra-fast speeds.
We are currently delivering fibre on demand, as you said, but there are occasions when a line may, it's actually better for us to build a fibre lead-in than to mediate the copper. So it's not always the case, but at the moment...
Like in the great town of Wye River, as they recovered from their bushfire, yeah, they received fibre to the premises because of geographical and other very difficult challenges.
I'll take your word for it. I'm afraid I don't know every premise in Australia.
No, that's okay. You're excused. Sorry, Minister, did you want to add something?
I just wanted to... there seemed to be some confusion when we were having the discussion around NBN remuneration and bonuses when we were talking about the number of NBN personnel that were receiving bonuses. I think Mr Rue said about 3,500.
I believe so, Senator.
So
it's going from memory,
I just wanted to
let me just confirm
assure the committee that the reduction to about 50, I think you said, that has happened under the current government.
Thank you.
Minister, can I just clarify though that with Mr Rue, the adjustment in your remuneration approach, going from 3,500 to 50, I hear what you said in terms of your evidence, but I just want to clarify so there's no confusion, Minister, that the guidance to NBN to effectively pull its head in terms of its bonuses was made by the former coalition government. That's correct, isn't it?
What I was
Mr.
trying
Rue?
to indicate...
I'm sorry, Senator, I'm trying to follow up an earlier question.
Yeah,
Could you repeat your question?
I don't need to ask you that. That's clear. Yes, the financial year ended in June 30.
They were rolled into... bonuses were rolled into the base pay.
Yes. Minister, I don't think...
bonuses has now been paid, as I understand it, without a link to performance.
But Minister, with respect, I don't think you can take, this government, I don't think can take credit for that work. Mr Rue, I will leave my block of questions. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Can I just confirm that it was a portion of the, just for total clarity, it was a portion of the target short-term incentive that was rolled into base pay, not all of it.
Okay, thank you. I've got a couple of quick questions, Chair, if I can. The member for Maranoa, Mr Rue, has asked questions about trying to improve the response times when there is service calls in very remote parts of Australia. So, and these are obviously areas serviced by satellite. There are major issues with the response time, and the clock doesn't often start to tick until the call is actually received. Obviously very complex anyway, communicating in remote parts of Australia, including the member for Maranoa's electorate. Are you able to give the committee any advice on your response times, whether that has been improved or whether there are plans to improve those response times?
Yeah, can I ask, Gavin, if you want to talk to
Yeah, I
that?
think I'll need to take on notice, Senator, the question as to what our response times are in isolated regions. In terms of...
I'm told they're 10 days, but the clock only starts to tick once the phone call is received, and so it can take a very long time to get a response.
Yeah, Senator, actually, it can be longer than 10 days in some really remote and isolated regions where, for example, limited access, we have a concept of limited access areas where we might need to hire boats or charters to get jobs done. It is a constant focus for us, Senator. The range of techniques that we're looking to deploy include, for example, self-recovery kits that might enable customers to have a crack at fixing the service. Like it could involve, and Senator, this isn't a commitment, but we're looking at these options, staging some spare equipment on site so that the individual in the premises could plug in a new device, for example. We're also improving the level of triage that we do in the network to make sure that by absolutely drain everything out of the tank to ensure that a truck roll is absolutely necessary. And we do everything we can in the network to avoid the need for a truck roll. Because we understand, Senator, in a lot of these areas, individuals don't have alternative paths of communication, so it's a significant issue for our customers.
Thank you, Chair. I've finished, but Senator Davey does have some questions.
Yes, I do have her next on my list.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Davey.
Thank you very much. Just a question on the back of that question by Senator Henderson. The NBN is not actually covered by any universal service obligation style regulations insofar as ensuring that outages are dealt with in a reasonable time frame. Is that correct? It's not like the old Telstra or Telecom landline where it had to be fixed within 3 days as part of the universal service obligation.
Senator, Mr Irving hasn't had a go tonight. I might ask him to answer that.
Yeah, Senator, we have the statutory infrastructure provider regime, which is the regime that applies to NBN in terms of us supplying service. The universal service obligation you refer to still also exists, and that has those timeframes that you mentioned in terms of restoration of the legacy copper services. So in fact, there are two sets of obligations, some applying to Telstra as a retailer and others applying to us as the wholesale infrastructure provider. And that ties back into the comments that Mr Williams made in terms of the timeframes that we commit, which then in a lot of cases they're backed up by the retail service provider, and in the regions you talk about that is largely Telstra. So there's an overlapping regime aimed to ensure customers get as quick a restoration as feasible.
But there's no legislated time frame for NBN to address NBN-related outages?
Not a legislated timeframe, no. But we have contractual commitments in our wholesale broadband agreements to restore service, and those are underpinned by the special access undertaking that we have with the ACCC.
Right. But 10 days is quite a significant delay, particularly for people who are in regional and isolated areas, often where the service provided by the NBN is their only connection or lifeline out. So 10 days without a service, because often these things are linked into the household NBN service.
Senator, sorry, the 10 days, where is that coming from?
That's what Mr Williamson said just before, when Senator Henderson said she'd had reports of 10 days and he said it could be longer.
Yeah, but they are the long tail, which we care a lot about, Senator. I mean, there are occasions when that occurs. I mean, I don't want the committee to get the impression that 10 days is the norm. But there are occasions when there are circumstances, as you quite rightly point out, particularly in remote areas, where that can be the case. And I assure you, we look at the long tail, as we call it, all the time, that we care a lot about it. But don't get the impression, please, that that's the norm. That's not the norm.
Yeah, so that applies, if I could clarify, that applies for our isolated areas.
Yep.
Remote areas have an SLA at 4 days.
4 days. Well, that is...
Our mean time to restore, I think, from memory, is less than 40 hours. And mean time meaning the average.
And I want to come back to the STAN program that you mentioned earlier, Mr. Rue, because this is a really beneficial program, particularly in regional areas that are, and for the benefits of Hansard. It is the, I get the right name for it. The STAN program is the Strengthening Telecommunications Against Natural Disasters.
That's correct.
In your opening statement, you said that 130 network sites have been impacted in the most recent round of devastating floods.
Impacting, yep.
Are you able, or do you cross-reference your data to identify where those outages or network sites have been able to link into a STAN site?
Yes, we do. Between Gavin and Catherine, do you want to talk about the detail?
So if I can understand the question. So, I mean, we understand, of course, when our STAN sites are being utilised.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so two categories of STAN assets. One is the community-based response, which it's community-based Wi-Fi. The other, the sort of network on wheels equipment that I spoke to. So those, yes, we do. We wheel in, we replace the network that's malfunctioning and restore service.
And I know a lot of these STAN sites were updated, or your website shows updates in 2021. Has there been a continual rollout of these STAN sites from 2021 to date?
Yeah, so the final number of locations, I think from memory, is it's not just Memory Centre, I've got it written in front of me, 1,067. Last update a couple of weeks ago was we'd completed 1,063. So the remaining to be completed is a small handful of locations, with the addresses of which would have come late in the program. That's the emergency response centres and disaster relief centres.
Like RFSs and...
Correct. Yep. The other assets we procured, losing track of COVID time now, but we procured that within the first 12 months of the STAN program, so that we were able to be match fit for that particular disaster season.
And I had the joys of seeing one of your very first satellite muster trucks just after, unfortunately, after the Black Summer bushfires, but the benefits it provided to the local community on the south coast there was really phenomenal. How many of those trucks do you now own?
Well, the STAN program funded 5, what we call, there are new muster vans. So these are literally big Evoco vans. The form factor, there's an additional 4 utes that equally have off-grid satellite comms capability with diesel generator, but they're ute format versus the STAN funded van format.
And I know at the time when we were purchasing them, we were hoping we wouldn't need to use them very often, but I think that...
Unfortunately, Senator, yes.
We have used them. I just want to also get an update on your... on the business fibre zones that we started rolling out when the Coalition was in government, and I think at last count there was about 321 business fibre zone sites across Australia. Is the new focus on upgrading access to the houses, taking away the focus on business fibre zones?
No, it's not, Senator. We've been pleased with actually the number of services that we're selling on a weekly basis. It's more than 200 a week, and that has continued on, actually, if anything, slightly accelerated. So there's the as you quite rightly point out, there's 321 suburbs. A lot of them are in regional Australia, of course, and we're pleased with the rollout. It hasn't slowed down, no. In fact, the opposite. It's the sale of those has been strong.
And I just want to understand the priority of the business now, going forward, because I know there was strong support for the business fibre zones, as you say, particularly in rural and regional Australia, because it levels the playing field.
Yep.
It was like services, but we're now looking at these. Well, the government has said 1.5 million premises for expected upgrades. Given that many of the premises across Australia, or my understanding was the household rollout of NBN had concluded in 2020. So I just want to get an understanding from you what the priority for NBN Co is. Is it to improve services to the businesses and business communities, or are we now going back to upgrading households that are already connected and enjoying?
The priorities of NBN are I think you mean in relation to business, Senator, is that what you're referring to? The priorities as it relates to business?
Yeah, well, certainly the business fibre zones were.
I mean, we have a focus on selling enterprise Ethernet services or services that can give symmetrical speeds, if you like, to small and medium businesses in particular. We also, though, have a focus of improving the experience that those customers have in terms of how they are connected, the time they're connected, in terms of guaranteeing the time that we'll build, in terms of whether our outages that we, to your earlier comment, Senator, we repair them quickly, and if you're a business, that's a particular concern if there's an outage during business hours, clearly. We also have a focus on building where there are existing services on whatever technology there is improving the quality of that service and the knowledge of business to where that they can best get the use of their NBN service, and they can do things like the equipment that they buy, the modems that they have, the speed tiers that they're on, their understanding of cloud-based services, etc., is a priority for us. So it's not just about and we're also clearly very focused on delivering upon the build-out of fibre and the build-out of fixed wireless services, which in regional rural Australia will also provide great services to businesses. I mean, at the end of the day, our priority, of course, is from a revenue point of view, but it's also ensuring better customer experience. The bit that I missed out was improving the way that we and the retailers operate together on behalf of the customer. So by providing, by simplifying our IT systems, by improving the data that we have, by providing what's called APIs, or if you like, a direct link in from our IT system to retailers' systems so that they can provide better service to their customers as well. So in summary, it's about revenue, it's about improving customer experience, improving the retailer's experience with NBN, and obviously building out more reliable and faster services for businesses.
Thank you. And also in your opening statement, you highlighted that you're upgrading and improving your fixed wireless, your 5G and your 4G network.
Yep.
And as a result, we're hoping that the 120-odd thousand satellite customers will get an improved service. Is that due to people dropping off the satellite service and freeing up some bandwidth or satellite?
It is, Senator, and again, Mr. Williams can talk about this at length. But what we're able to do is expand the radius from a fixed wireless tower, the distance from the fixed wireless tower that a customer or premise may be that can actually access the fixed wireless service. And as a result of that, the distance has gone from an average of about 14 kilometres to almost 50 kilometres from that fixed wireless tower that can get a fixed wireless service.
Even with 5G?
using a combination of 5G and 4G. And the reason is that by using 5G with our 4G service, we're actually able to use that 4G service, we're able to effectively use it to a further distance. Again, the physics, Mr. Williams can talk at length to. But the reason, so the result of that is that there are therefore premises that were outside that radius that therefore had a satellite, a capability of getting a satellite. So there's around about 400,000, just over 400,000 premises in Australia covered by satellite. We'd be able to take 120 of those. Not all are connected today, of course. About 1 in 4 are. But we will be able to move 120,000 premises from only able to get satellite, if you like, to be able to get fixed wireless. And on top of that, because there will be fewer customers on the satellite service, we'll be able to improve the amount of data that those customers who are still on satellite are able to enjoy. And we're still working through exactly what that means, but it should mean more data, basically, allowances, or a longer period of time, which is not what's called unmetered. Gavin, did you want to expand on any of that? Are you happy with
Mr.
that?
Rue, you did a marvellous job. I don't know, Senator, if there's any clarification.
You want a bonus or something?
Can we make sure that's in Hansard?
And I'm just interested, this is nothing to do with government policy or anything, but are you finding increased competition from the Starlinks of the world and these low-flying, smaller satellite services? And as a satellite customer, should I be...
This time I'll let Gavin answer this.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to have your head in the sand and not notice that there's some new investment in low Earth orbit technology.
It's ruining my stargazing, but anyway.
There you go. So, and I mean, Starlink is one, and there's appears to be a number of others coming through as well. Look, our numbers on our active premises for satellite are a matter of record.
Yep.
We would have peaked in around August, September 21. We're probably about 5 or 6,000 down since then, which I would categorise as kind of modest. But there's a couple of other things operating in the industry as well, and that includes more value being placed in 4G plans from the mobile operators. And it's got, and the impact of this on our business, it's a bit of yin and a bit of yang, because it does mean that if it's deloading our satellite, it means that we can fulfil our ambition is to make, really push that technology for everything it's got for our Sky Muster customers, and with our path to reducing metering.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all from me.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of the NBN officials at the desk. We appreciate your time. We will now take a 5-minute